team around vision for the future for next year, our 2021 vision. And I do know that there'll be a season of momentum. I kind of believe it's already starting, that there's this sense of, we're coming out of 2020, and irrespective of what 2021 will bring circumstantially, we've discovered that the church doesn't have to be held back even by the global pandemic. And once we come to terms with that as leaders, we then realize that there's not really any excuse for us not to be moving things forward. If we've actually grown through this season, then it's true that the church is going to prevail and that the gates of hell aren't going to prevail against it. So I just think that that's something that we need to be ready for, that God will continue to build and continue to grow his church and his people. And for us as leaders, we have to be the leaders that are ready to grow with all that God has for our lives as well. So that should excite you, it should scare you, it should challenge you. And so what I wanted to share with us this afternoon was some thoughts about how we as leaders can lead in that way. And I gave this a title, and it's a broad category, and it's around prophetic leadership. Because I actually believe that all leadership is prophetic. And the reason I believe that is because the word prophecy and prophet is, sure, it's an Old Testament word, but it's a word that makes sense in today's context. People know that, a prophet is something to do with the future. And the way we frame it in our language at Beyond Church is that, prophecy really is just speaking into, God's preferred future for somebody, and speaking words of encouragement about a person's next step, whether it be next week or next year, and what God sees in them and for them. So leadership is prophetic. All leadership is prophetic. And the reason I say that is because leadership is being the first to see the unseeable. Leadership is being the first to see the unseeable future and then quantify it, articulate it, illuminate it, so show people what it is, and then take others into it. So it's challenging, right? But it is at its core prophetic. It's about the future. And as leaders, it's about seeing the future before anyone else sees it, because as a leader, you're going to have to go there first. You're going to have to be able to quantify it even before you get there, so you can point people to it. And you're going to be able to have to articulate it. That's why language is so important. And put light on it, illuminate it, have it make sense for people. And then you want to take people there. You've got to actually do the work of leadership, which is getting not just yourself from where you are to where you need to go, but getting everybody else there as well. So, yeah, it's a big call. But it is prophetic at its root. And I think it's really important that we understand that as leaders. And so when we lead prophetically, what we're doing this when we see the unseeable. And for lots of people, the unseeable thing is actually the call of God on their life. And so we do this when we see the call of God on somebody's life, and we challenge them to step into it. And that's as simple as, everybody's next step. So it could be for some people, water baptism. We see that for them, that's going to be a significant next step for them. So we actually see it, we say it, and we take them on the journey. It's an invitation, but it's kind of not really an invitation. It's more like water baptism is your next step. And why wouldn't you do that kind of thing? It's God's preferred future for you. And we're going to go there. We're going. Water baptism, anything like that, even like leadership that's on someone's life and team leadership. Yeah, we don't force people to do things, but we want the best for people. And if we consider the call of God on them, the invitation, the excellent ask is, hey, it's so important. It's so critical for you to be stepping into this for your own life. It's almost less like an ask and more like a let's go. We're going together. Just get in with me. We're going. The same thing with inviting, people to church and, any of that kind of stuff. That's all prophetic leadership. That's all seeing the future on behalf of other people and bring them on the journey with you. So I'm going to pause and just ask you, can everybody hear me? Great. All right. So that's key. This phrase is key. So as leaders, prophetic leaders, we should be saying things like, this is what I see God is doing in your life, and this is where God is calling you. You should be saying that. We should be saying that to people all the time. It should be common vernacular. I see this is what God's doing in your life, and this is where God's calling you. I see this for your future. I see the unseen. So let's go there together. And so when we lead people prophetically, this is actually really key. that when we're leading prophetically, as opposed to just any other kind of leadership, although I do believe all leadership should be prophetic, when we lead people prophetically, we lead the emerging person. So we're leading the person that's coming. We're not necessarily just leading the person that's there. So let me try and explain that in more detail. We lead the potential person, the emerging person. We lead the promise that's in the person. We lead the future person. So we don't lead the person that was, or even the person that is. For example, I don't expect Sam to preach an average sermon because he's only preached a few sermons at Beyond Church. I expect him to preach an excellent message because he's becoming, emerging. It's on his life. The prophetic is that he is becoming an excellent preacher. So, and when we have a few weeks of low attendance in a location, I don't expect Kate, for example, to be content with that because Kate leads a growing location. So I lead the Kate that leads a growing location. I don't lead the Kate that's stuck in a low week. I lead the Kate that's leading a growing location. I lead the next thing that's on her life. I lead the emerging identity and the God call, which is an always growing call. Because in our growing location, we're leading leaders that are reaching new people all the time in new ways, seeing impact in our community. That's the leader I'm leading. And this applies to everything. It's how we treat everything. And it's not just how we treat people, but it's how we treat, our online location. I actually believe that our online location will be a world-class experience. And therefore, that informs the way that we lead in the present. We have to be okay with seeing the future and then leading that reality now. Otherwise, that's not leadership. It's just being stuck where we are. Another simple example, a practical example about leading prophetically is in Cessnock, I see an auditorium full of 200 people. Now in COVID, that's actually illegal, so we won't do that. But we make sure that we have 200 chairs ready, don't we? Because we're leading the promise, we're leading the future, we're leading the emerging location, we're leading the potential. So there's going to be at least 200 chairs in location. There's going to be at least enough room in the auditorium to fit 200 people in there. They're going to have a sound system that immerses 200 people every week, not just the 40 people or 60 people or 100 people or 150 people. We're going to preach to a room that's full, and we're going to preach in a way that preaches to a full room full of faith-filled people, because we're always leading prophetically. We're leading to the future and the future of people. So that's and what that does is when we lead prophetically, lead the room prophetically, lead people prophetically, we give permission for the location, the room, the person to rise to that level of expectation. And this is key. People will only rise to the level of expectation that you call them to. People will only ever rise to the level of expectation that you call them to. And so we lead with growing levels of expectation, because if we want to lead growing people, the expectation has to continue to grow. And so we have to be comfortable with having the expectation on our leadership lifted. So if I'm lifting the expectation on you, you should be thanking me. If I'm having the expectation lifted on me, I should be thankful that someone cares enough to call me up into the next thing that God has for my life. So if you are uncomfortable with high level expectation, then you'll be uncomfortable leading prophetically. And I just believe that in the season we're coming into, like I shared at the beginning of this, that we have to become very comfortable with exponential growth for ourselves. And I'm leading prophetically right now, speaking into your life and what I see for you. And I do know that you all have the capacity to lead this way, to see more in other people, to see more in where you are, and to speak it out and be prophetic about that future for the people you're leading and the place in which you're leading. So our level of conviction around this whole idea of leading prophetically, I think that it will determine the level of leadership that we can grow into. So we have to be okay with having that level of expectation and that prophetic destiny called out in our life. So what I want to do, I want to finish up with just a few thoughts on how we can do that practically. I've mentioned a few practical examples that kind of illustrate what I'm talking about when I talk about, leading prophetically. But just quickly, how to lead prophetically practically. One, it's first and foremost so important that you see yourself as the prophet. Like, we just have to be getting more and more comfortable with the idea that God wants to do great things in us and through us. And unless we lead like that, unless we lead prophetically, believing great things for ourselves and for others, that God's got good plans for us and good plans for his people and good plans for his church, unless we lead like that, we don't just disqualify ourselves from our own God destiny, but we disqualify all those people that God entrusts to us. And I'll tell you right now that God will get on with the business of allowing others to grow. And so we've got to be okay with seeing ourselves as the prophet. So God will find, people will find where they flourish. And if it's not with us, they'll find others and other places where they're going to be able to grow into all that God has for their life. So see yourself as the prophet. Secondly, see the mission as compelling and compel people to join in, to join it with you. That's really important, that unless you have a conviction that what you're doing is the most important work that you'll ever do with your life, there is no way you can compel anybody else to see that for themselves. And in this next season, as we move out of our 2020 year and move into the what's next for Beyond Church, having that revelation, that conviction that this work is the most compelling work that you'll ever do is so important. It comes down to as simple as, we don't need to beg people to come and help us. We should be surprised when people don't want to do stuff. We should be surprised when people say no. We should be like, oh, really? I thought this was like the best thing that you could be doing with your life. And it is. Not everyone's going to see that, and that's fine. But don't let that dampen the conviction that you have about what God's called you to do. Because as someone who does like to follow leaders, I want to follow leaders who are passionate about what they're leading. I want to follow leaders who are compelled to do the things they do. I want to follow leaders who are leaders of conviction and purpose. That's the kind of leader I want to follow. Now, I don't have to do everything that leader does or be in every meeting that leader's in. I don't have to say yes to every request they ask of me. But man, I want them to have a conviction that what they're doing is the most important work of their life. I don't want to follow anyone else other than someone who's like that. So to live prophetically, see yourself as a prophet, see the mission as compelling, and compel people to join it with you. Thirdly, see the future in faith, and this is kind of encapsulates this whole idea. But prophets are imagine if kind of people, not what if kind of people. It's a big difference. Like, a prophet is imagine if we were doing this. Imagine if that childcare centre was built in Scone. Imagine if we had another 3 locations in 2021. Imagine if this person said yes to letting our location. Imagine if that person gave up their job and gave their time to volunteer at the church 3 days a week. Imagine if we will receive that benevolent donation to do that project in Vietnam. Imagine. That's it. Prophetic leadership, seeing the future in faith. What if kind of people is, what if we don't reach the vision offering? Or, what if they say no? Or what if we run out of money? Or what if the council doesn't approve the development application? Or what if it's going to cost me too much time? Or what if... So prophetic leadership, they see, prophetic leaders see the future in faith, and they are imagine if kind of leaders, not what if kind of leaders. That's something very practical. You can just immediately change your language and just stop saying what if and replace it with imagine if. And finally, the final practical thought for us to apply in how to be a prophetic leader. And you might think, well, I'm not sure that I am one. I'm not sure that I totally get it. So what I want to do, I want to leave you with something really practical that you could do this week that will start to build the identity of a prophetic leader within you. And it's to practice your prophetic gift. And to practice your prophetic gift is actually really, really, really easy. And it's just to be an encourager. If you were to quantify this week some encouragement and say, well, this week I'm going to encourage 3 people about 3 things I don't think they've ever been encouraged about before, you are actually growing and developing your gift as a prophetic leader. Because really, encouragement's the same thing. It's seeing the God future over someone's life and calling it